Waldy and Bendy.
Hello and welcome to the podcast They Couldn't Stop, Waldy and Bendy's Adventures in Art. I'm Waldemar Januszczak, art critic of the Sunday Times, although when people are in a hurry, that tends to get boiled down to Waldy. And I'm joined, as always, by a man of international mystery, an unknowable figure in the art world whom some call the Shadow and others call Bendy. He came into the world as Bendor Grosvenor. But what does that really mean? What are we dealing with here? Bendy, who actually are you?
I don't know. I've been trying to work it out, and if you can ever answer that question, please let me know. But you're so kind to me, Waldy, and this week I have to remind you yet again that I am merely a bit part in your universe. In fact, I think this week I'm going to be the ear to your Van Gogh.
See, I threw you there, didn't I? But I'm glad that's cleared up. I'm Van Gogh and you're the ear. It's good to get these small existential problems out of the way quickly, as we've got plenty of big ones coming up. Because in this podcast, we're going to be diving nervously into the world of fakes and forgeries. Yes, the unreal is on the way. Also, after the major success of last week's investigation into the role of the donkey in art, we're returning to the animal kingdom to look at fish. And don't forget, everything we talk about, all the pictures, all the clips, it's all illustrated and illuminated on the podcast pages of zczfilms.com, a goldmine of information. But first, fakes and forgeries. Now, Bendy, if that really is you I'm talking to, you must know a lot about fakes from your art dealer days, right? You used to work with Philip Mould. You were on that program, Fake or Fortune. So I presume you were always on the lookout for forgeries, right?
Yeah, and now I'm working with you. I mean, it's a perfect topic for us, isn't it? A couple of old frauds. But the TV show Fake or Fortune, we always had to get a couple of good fakes in there to balance things out. I think the best one we had was a very obviously fake picture by Chagall, purporting to be by Chagall, which it got into the hands of the Chagall Committee. I don't know if you remember this. And they decided that because it was a fake, that under French law, they could destroy it. And the poor fellow who paid about 100,000 quid for this picture, I don't know if he ever got it back, because I think French law is pretty clear on this point, that if something is faux, it can be destroyed. And, I don't entirely disagree. I think probably that should be the fate of all fakes, that they should be destroyed for having tricked us. What do you think?
Well, I think it's all very ambiguous, the truth of it, because if it's a really, really good fake, I mean, I ask myself a very important question, which is just because the signature on it is different, if the picture is really good, does that mean that somehow it has no value just because the person supposed to have made it didn't make it? Or should we not just be taking these things on face value? This is what it is. It looks great. What's wrong with that? Does it really matter who made it? I tend to feel a bit like that.
Yeah, I suppose it depends on what part of the process you kind of stop the clock, doesn't it? Because I agree, one good artist paying homage to another one can be a wonderful creative exercise and can be nice to look at. But the problem is that these things tend to get in the sausage factory of crime, don't they? And then a middleman gets involved. And somewhere along the line, a fraud is committed and somebody loses often lots of money. And they also lose something, I think, slightly more important, which is a sort of an artistic innocence, because they're tricked. We're all tricked by these things, and often that is their ultimate purpose. And for me, art history is all about doing justice to an artist. The reason I like to find works that have been lost over the centuries is because I think it's about rehabilitating that painting and the work of the artist. And it goes in the other direction too, that sometimes you see a work that is wrongly attributed to an artist, which doesn't do them justice because it's a bad one. And I think it's just as important to root all those out. So I'm slightly less ambiguous than you on the whole fake question for that reason.
But broadly speaking, you see, the trouble is that sometimes people come to conclusions about pictures that are wrong. I mean, there are plenty of examples of pictures that were deemed to be right, which turned out not to be right, and vice versa. because ultimately these things are unprovable. I mean, I'm sure you must have had instances in your own career. I mean, if you work with Philip Mould, if you did Fake or Fortune, there must have been instances where you were absolutely convinced that something was right, and then somebody else comes along and says, no, it isn't. And because there's no real way of proving it, you're sort of stuck with this middle ground where the authenticity of the picture sort of gets in the way, really, of its quality.
Yeah, no, that happens to me all the time. You know, things that I I claim by someone can't be proved. But you always have to believe your first instinct. I mean, you always have to believe what you conclude yourself. It doesn't really matter if you can't persuade someone else. But I think it's a totally different question when someone has deliberately tried to trick you, and usually for money. And we might come on to some of the more famous cases later on in the program. But um, some fakers I do admire for their intrinsic skill, but I very rarely want to shake their hand and pat them on the back.
Well, you see, I'm in a difficult position because I wouldn't name amongst my friends probably Britain's greatest ever forger, Sean Greenhouse. Right, I ghosted his memoirs. I've known him for many years now. Frankly, I love the man, and one of the reasons I love him is because he took such evident pleasure in fooling the art world, including me, of course. Now, the reason people like forgers is because the art world comes across as one thing, doesn't it? It's haughty, it's
Yeah,
full of so-called experts with
yeah.
quotation marks around it. There are these people who present themselves as these fountains of all knowledge. So, of course, everybody loves it when some uneducated oik from Bolton, which is what they thought Sean Greenhouse was. Of course, it's not true. He's nothing of the sort, but that's how the image came across.
Mm.
Fools the British Museum and fools the Chicago Art Institute and fools loads of experts and fools Valdemar and Uszczak. They loved it. And you know, who doesn't love an outlaw? You know, we all love an outlaw. And given the room there is in this for ambiguity, given the fact that there's not a single person on earth that can point to every single image we've ever made and say that's real and that isn't real, given
Mm.
that ambiguity, there's space, I think, for this sort of outlaw forger character to exist and to be loved on one level. I mean, you've got to remember that if stuff costs as much as it costs now, you know, the obscene, ridiculous, unworldly prices that things fetch, you know, that in itself is a crime, I think. It's a sort of crime against civilization.
Yeah.
So we're weighing one crime up against another. If someone's passing something off and it manages to get bought for millions of quid, I can see why some people like that.
Yes. And we should remember, of course, that Michelangelo, perhaps the greatest artist who ever lived in the Western world, his first sale, I think, was a forgery. He tried to fake up an antique statue, and that landed him his first patron. I think actually fakers do serve a useful purpose. I'm slightly contradicting myself here. They're like a vaccine, aren't they? You need to introduce a little bit of fake something in order to trigger the system so that we're able to find fakes in the future. And people like Sean Greenhouse, I think, do actually have a public role in that sense. Um, and one of the most famous recent examples, and this ties in with your outrage over the money side of the modern art market, is the Nerdler Gallery in New York, which was one of the great mainstays of the U.S. art market. It had been going for 150 years, and it shut abruptly in 2011 after it was discovered that it had been selling fakes for about 15 years. I think it's something about an estimated $100 million worth of artworks by people like Rothko, Robert Motherwell, and Jackson Pollock. And it turned out they'd all been made in a garage in Queens, New York, by a Chinese artist called Pei Shen Qian. And he was paid around $9,000 for each one. And some of these works were sold for up to $17 million. Now, I think that does reflect an outrage of why these works were so highly valued. And and when experts looked at these paintings in isolation after it was realized that they weren't by Rothko and Pollock, the scales fell from their eyes and they said, well, clearly they're rubbish. And the point is that for the decade or so in which they were considered to be masterpieces and valuable, nobody really looked at them. They
Mm,
just looked at what they were supposed to be. They weren't serving a purpose as artworks. They were serving a
mm,
purpose as brands, which said about the collector, look how rich I am.
mm.
And we should be grateful to the forger for that.
Absolutely right. And see, this is the thing about Sean Greenhouse. As I said, I know him really well now. And if you go into a museum with Sean Greenhouse, you know, he will immediately point out to you the inconsistencies in things he comes across. Why? because he knows more about it than the people working there. This is the thing, to become a really great forger, you have to be so skilled in such a variety of things. Um, and you have to just know, so much more than the experts. I mean, the people who bought stuff from Sean Greenhouse, frankly, they should have their jobs replaced by him, because he would never have been fooled the way they were. You know the story of how he got me, don't you, with the Gauguin? Have you heard this story?
One of my favorite tales, but let's tell everybody again.
It reflects wonderfully on me, yes. So I was making a big film about Gauguin, and there was an exhibition in the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, the home of Van Gogh. There's a big show about Van Gogh and Gauguin. And in this show were various new sculptures by Gauguin that had been found relatively recently, including this small statue of a faun, which had been bought for hundreds of thousands of dollars by the Chicago Art Institute. It was on show at the Van Gogh Museum. And I'm doing this film about Gauguin. This wonderful little thing comes up. So there's a scene in my Gauguin biography where I'm standing next to it saying, and of course, this is such an interesting work. It seems to take Gauguin's oeuvre in a new direction, doesn't it? It's who knew that he did this? It expands our knowledge of him, blah, blah, blah. So 5 years later, I open the newspaper and there it is, Sean Greenhouse caught in Bolton making these forgeries. And see, what's interesting, Sean told me later that when he was making this Gauguin form, he dropped it before he finished it. And so it broke in half, right? And so he glued it back together with araldite and then finished it. And he said, how could anybody have bought this when clearly it had been worked on after the join was fixed with araldite? This is the kind of thing I mean, is that experts look at things in a certain way with a preconceived idea, but they don't know the reality of making. And you see, that is what I have learned most from reading Sean's words and things. The making of things is a different business from the looking at them that we do. We look at the finished image. Well, we have no real idea of how it got there.
Yes.
We don't really know what it takes to make a Renaissance bronze or a brooch from the Middle Ages, but he does. And it's that excitement in the process of making that he conveyed to me. And it's one of the reasons I love the man.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you express it very well. And I'm glad good things came out of the fact that you got rumbled. And you've been very honest and open about it. And not all people who are fooled by these things are. And I wanted to just refer you to who I think is actually probably the greatest forger who ever lived. I can't name them because all these things are still sub judice. But recently there was a series of old master fakes that were revealed to be forgeries, which have been sold for many millions of dollars. Including a Franz Hals, a Parmigianino, and these paintings were on display in the major museums of the world. The Franz Hals was declared a national treasure by the Louvre, no less, and they even tried to buy it. And the Parmigianino was displayed in the Metropolitan Museum in New York. Now, both of these works happen to be sold by Sotheby's in New York on the back of a whole litany of experts saying these were period works. And when Sotheby's realized that something might be awry, they very swiftly and very properly refunded all the money. Now, that's great. But as far as I know, there's been no hint of any contrition or any analysis of systems that went awry from either the Met or the Louvre. And the same people who gave the thumbs up to these paintings are still being sought out as experts to give the thumbs up to other paintings by House and so on. So we need a reckoning, I think, still.
Well, that's exactly my point. So you know who the forger is, do you, Bendor?
I have an idea.
And you're not going to tell everybody?
No, because they haven't admitted it. And there's various cases and investigations ongoing. And of course, I might be wrong.
Yeah.
So we should be careful.
It's definitely not Sean, I'm sure of that. No. But there is a famous, I mean, this is out there, so I can go on about it. Sean has claimed to be the maker of this Leonardo da Vinci painting called the La Bella Principessa, which has been doing the rounds a bit. It's actually a sort of gouache on vellum of a Milanese princess of the early 16th century. And Sean reckons that he did it when he was a young man, and that it's actually a girl called Sally who used to work in the co-op where he was working at the time. So it wasn't really La Bella Principessa. But there is a lot of discussion about it. I mean, most Leonardo authorities agree that it's not right. I certainly am 100% sure it isn't. But it's at some point it's been on the market for $150 million. I mean, that's an awful lot of of money to be touting about for something that may or may not be, as stated. I mean, we have to tread carefully in what we say
Mhm.
here, but this is it. I mean, Sean would tell you that even if he didn't paint it, I reckon he's the kind of person who would stand up and say he did just to cast doubts on the price tag because he doesn't agree with it. You know what I mean?
Yes. And we do have to be slightly careful, don't we, of taking the word of forgers at face value because they have demonstrated their ability to mislead. That's part of their success. So we must take things with a pinch of salt. I should also say that those involved in selling many of these fakes have not realised that they're fakes until it was too late, and we can't cast aspersions on too many people in the system.
Of course not. And you're 100% right about not trusting fakers. I mean, Sean, if you're listening to this podcast, can I just say straight away that I never believe you totally about anything you say? It's a gene, isn't it? These guys have a gene in them which allows them to be devious and to take on the system and to be the outlaw Sean Greenhouse. And I've looked him in the eye sometimes and asked him something, and he's given me an answer, and I don't know. I just don't buy it. He's a slippery being, and he's done slippery things. But I can't help but love him for it. I mean, the world needs more people with that sort of talent, I
Yes,
think.
yes.
But
You've in this series, in this discussion, you've persuaded me actually of the greater merits of the forger in the system. And I just want to finish by saying that one of the pictures that Sean mentions in his book about creating, he doesn't say it explicitly, but he basically hints very strongly that he made a Rembrandt self-portrait, which was discovered at auction in, I think, Cirencester for about £2 million. It made a new discovery, sold as 19th century, I think, and it subsequently ended up in the Getty Museum in Los Angeles for about $30 million. Now, I don't believe him, but
hmm.
he did make us all think twice and look more carefully at new discoveries. So that's good, isn't it?
I think it is good, and I think that we shouldn't trust Sean. Although, hello, Sean, we can love him, I think,
Mhm.
but it is important to have someone waving a red flag and saying beware, buyer beware. That's the whole point. And if it stops the art market careering ever crazily upwards into yet more ridiculous prices, all of which are attached to this sense of an authenticity of a signature, then I'm all for it. By the way, the pictures you talk about, the Parmigianino, the France House, I mean, we're going to put those up on the zcz.com podcast page because they're so damn good.
Mm.
I find it hard to doubt them. I mean, this is the thing. Really good forgers are really good, aren't they, Bendy?
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, time to move on from something slippery to something even more slippery. Now, some of you listening to Bendy there talking about forgeries, you're probably thinking, is that really him? Well, let me put you out of your misery. It definitely was. And how do I know for sure? Well, because the next bit of the podcast is a voyage to the heartland of the Bendy experience. This is 100% pure Bendy. It couldn't be purer.
Kendall Grosvenor had a farm, E-I-E-I-O.
Yes, forget the archers, folks. This is where the real agricultural action is. We're back with the animal kingdom, back on Bendy's farm. So, Bendo, everybody loved the donkeys bit last week, and they loved it because, oh, everybody loves donkeys, of course, but also I think because, the animal kingdom genuinely has played this really significant role in art. It is one of the recurring big stories. So that's why this week we've stayed in the animal kingdom and we've gone for fish, the fish in art. Now I imagine up there in your Scottish castle, you do a lot of trout fishing or trout tickling, and what is it you do up there with the fish?
It's a lovely jingle you've made, but for reasons of accuracy, I should point out that it's actually my wife's farm. It's not mine at all. And I don't like fishing. Do you like fishing? I get terribly impatient with those bloody knots. I've tried it a few times and I get in a terrible tangle, and I can't sit still anyway. So fishing's not really for me.
Oh,
Do you
really?
like it?
I had you down. I've never fished. I love eating fish. I love looking at fish, but no, I can't say I've ever tried it. I thought you at the end of this discussion you were going to say to me, Waldy, I'm going to share the joys of fishing with you. We'll come up here to the farm, to the castle, and we'll do a bit of trout tickling together in the Scottish Highlands. I was looking forward to that.
Oh, well, you're more than welcome to come up anytime, but I prefer the Russian type of fishing, which is I think involves hand grenades.
Anyway, we have very, very democratically got together a list of the 5 finest appearances of the fish in art. It's very democratic because I've chosen 4 of them, Bendy's chosen the other one. And I believe even in those circumstances, we're managing to have an argument here because for some absurd reason, you have managed to put Haim Soutines' Still Life with a Herring from 1916 at the bottom of the list. I can't believe that, Bendy. Tell me about it.
Well, I was hoping you were going to tell me about it to try and sell it to me. It just looks like a plate of rather dull herring to me, and I don't like herring. So I miss the significance of this painting entirely, and that's why it's in 5th place.
What can I say? Well, first of all, it's not just a plate of herring. I mean, look at it again properly. You've got 3 herrings, right? And what's next to the herrings on either side?
A knife and a fork.
It's not a knife and a fork. It is 2 forks. And the way they are painted makes them look like claws or human hands. So there's an immediate air of desperation about it. And look at the date, 1916. What was happening in 1916? The First World War was happening. Starvation was happening. Poverty was happening. So this is a picture about deprivation, about the absence of luxuries and the absence of things. So the herrings are miserable little skeletal fish, and these claw-like forks are reaching towards them. And it's a typical bit of Soutine, who I think is one of the great 20th century painters, massively underestimated, and who really put it out there, you know. I mean, he's what they call an expressionist, right? And I mean, you love expressionism, don't you, Bendy? I know you do.
Sometimes.
In this instance, I'm going to try and persuade you. I'm trying to get you to say something so that I don't keep talking all the time, because I have so much to say about this.
Good, I don't. It's just a plate of fish.
Listen, let me tell you a great Soutine story, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was born in a Jewish ghetto in Vitebsk, which is now in Belarus. And as you know, Jewish artists, well, Jews are not supposed to make art, right? You know the 10 Commandments. You're a good Christian figure. You know that the 3rd commandment says, "Thou shalt not make any graven image of anything that is on the earth or in the sea below." In other words, don't make art, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's where iconoclasm happens. That's why all the Protestants beat up all the images of Christ in the Middle Ages. So that's why you've got no art in synagogues. You go to a synagogue, there's no art. It's just writing. That's why there's no art in Islamic mosques, no figurative art, because there's a prescription against it in the 10 Commandments. So making art for Jews was a transgression. And that's why there are no great Jewish artists until, the end of the 20th century, Pizarro. It's a very loaded thing to have done. And Soutine came from this very religious shtetl in Belarus, but he was always drawing. He loved doing it. And one day, the sons of the rabbi caught him drawing in a field in Vitebsk, and they beat him up. They almost killed him, beat him to a pulp. So his mother sued the village elders and sued the rabbi for this damage and hurt they'd inflicted on her son. She won the case, and with the money, she sent him to art school.
Oh, that's lovely.
Isn't that wonderful? It's like a parable. So he ended up in Paris. He was a very close friend of Modigliani, moved in the same circle as Picasso, and was famous for his decrepitude. I mean, this is what he brought to the storyline. This impoverished guy, been beaten up, nearly killed for art, who shows it in every brushstroke. You know, he lets it all hang out, and I think he's massively underestimated. And that's why I would have put him nearer the top of this list, but you put him at the bottom. But if I was putting something near the bottom, I would probably put this William Blake image of a fish that you chose. So tell us about that, because it's joint 5th. Let's call it that, joint 5th, joint bottom.
Yes, okay. Although you've done such a good job of shaming me on Soutine's life and art that I concede he should go up into 4th. This will be in 5th. Then it's a drawing watercolor by William Blake done in about 1797. He was commissioned to illustrate a poem by someone called Thomas Gray, which was called "Ode on the Death of a Favorite Cat Drowned in a Tub of Goldfish." And the cat in question, this is dear to all our hearts, the cat in question was called Selima, and it belonged to Horace Walpole, who is the sort of the English equivalent of George Virtue. He charts, he's an early art historian in the mid-18th century and charts the life of British artists. And his cat died, very tragically, in a goldfish bowl in 1747. And in fact, the The bowl still exists at Horace Walpole's house, Strawberry Hill. You can go and visit it, and there's a little plaque and everything. So this set of drawings was done by William Blake in order to illustrate the poem. And what we can see here is the cat peering down at the fishes in the water, eyeing them up, ready for a tasty snack, and not knowing what what his tragic fate will be. And the fish look rather sort of, they're a little bit cartoony, and they're quite innocent, and they've got little figures on their fins, who I think are sirens, drawing the cat in. And it is not a great work of art, I have to concede that. But you see, that's the problem with fish in art, isn't it? The fish are quite blank. They don't have much character or expression. So you've got to kind of ladle along with a trowel if you're an artist. And that, I think, is what William Blake has done here.
I disagree with pretty much every single word there, Bendor. Fish are not characterless. They're full of character, as we have seen already, and we will see in the future as we go higher up the list. But so are you telling me that Horace Walpole's cat drowned in a goldfish bowl?
Yeah, I was trying to get the fish, and it leapt in and couldn't get out again. And the poem, it's a very long poem. Don't worry, I'm not going to read it all out. But it just warns you that a fish may look gold and glistening, and it steals Shakespeare's famous line that all that glistens is not gold. So it's a morality tale.
It's a for a start, the cat must have been incredibly stupid. How can a cat drown in a goldfish bowl? But putting that aside, I mean, what a ridiculous thing to write a poem about, to start with. I mean, Thomas Gray, of all people, to write an ode to a cat and a goldfish bowl.
This was the 18th century. They didn't have much else to do.
Well, clearly not. And neither did Blake. I mean, this isn't just one illustration. He did a bunch of them, didn't he, for the same poem? I mean, you would have thought people had better things to do. This is this terrible Enlightenment genre, the mock heroic, isn't it? I mean, the rape of the lock, Pope, is the same, isn't it? It's all about the stealing of a lock of hair, as if the end of the world depended on it. I think this should be disqualified from the list, and I'll tell you why. I don't think it should even be here, because it's more about the cat than it is about the goldfish, isn't it? I mean, this is all about this silly cat who drowns. And the poor goldfish, its only role is to be gold, and to give give Thomas Gray an opening for his quotation from Shakespeare. I mean, we learn nothing about fish from this, nothing at all.
Yeah, I think we're discovering our disagreement about fish in general. I don't really like eating them, yet alone catching them. So I'm always looking at fish to be the butt of the joke in the painting.
Well, let's move on quickly in that case. Listeners, if you want to look at a pale minnow of a goldfish in a pale watercolor that doesn't deserve to be on anybody's list, let alone the top 5 fish in art, please go to zczfilms.com, where you will see what Bendor has inflicted upon you.
I'm just trying to stop you doing this to me again. We can't have crows as animals on the podcast every week. I'm sabotaging it.
Okay, well, let's move on. Let's move on to a proper fish. I mean, a fish with presence, a great big fish, because number 3 in the list is possibly the greatest fish ever to appear in a Baroque church. And it's from, I can't say I've ever actually seen it, but I love the photographs of it. And it's a Baroque pulpit from a small village in Poland, made in the 1750s, they reckon. And what it is well, you describe it, Bendor. Go on. I know what it is. You describe it. It'll feel fresher.
It looks like, there's that kid's character, Barney the dinosaur. It
Yes.
looks like that. It's the most extraordinary bit of decorative art I think I've ever seen. The pulpit is about a story high, and it's the mouth of a whale open. And I suppose the poor priest climbs up this tail of the whale, up the steps inside, and emerges like Jonah, I presume, is the analogy, and spews forth his religious wisdom on the poor unsuspecting congregation below.
I think that's exactly it. Of course, we should immediately own up to the fact that the whales are not fish, they're mammals. We do know this, but back in the 1750s, that would have been still unclear in the small villages of Poland. And in fact, most of if you see Jonah and the whale, most of the paintings of it are very ambiguous about the fishy creature from which he emerges. I mean, even up on the Sistine ceiling, the prophet Jonah's on the Sistine ceiling, right? And that is a giant trout that it's come out of. It is not some kind of whale or sea monster. Yeah, but isn't this charming? So it is massive. It's a massive, great clunking pulpit, 5 times bigger than the priest. And out he comes in the mouth of the whale and delivers his sermon about redemption. And of course, you know why the story of Jonah and the whale became this important story in sort of clerical history. You know why it's got that power, don't you?
No, is it something about indigestion?
It goes beyond indigestion. It goes to the death of Jesus. So Jesus Christ was dead for 3 days and then he rose again. It's called Easter, Bendor. Most art historians know a little bit about it. So it's all about Jesus the Savior and about redemption. So the priest comes out in the role of Jonah. I mean, he is, as it were, prefiguring the rising of Christ from the dead, which gives it more and more power. And remember, this is a village church, tiny place in Poland. And you know, sermons are the occasion when you go on the pulpit and you really rock the boat. You know, even I remember the sermons I used to hear as a kid when I was at Polish boarding school run by priests. You know, it was all about thunder and death and hell and what's going to happen to you if you tell a lie. You know, delivered from the mouth of a giant fish in a small Polish church. Oh, I can imagine this being so effective. It's at number 3 in the list, but heavens, maybe we should move it up a bit.
Do you really think you're a good Polish Catholic? Do you really think people would have taken it seriously and been impressed, or would they have just sort of sat there giggling, thinking this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen?
That's just the most ridiculous comment I've ever heard. Of course they took it seriously. I mean, remember, what we know now, they didn't know then. And even when I was a kid growing up, I believed in the sermons that I was preached. You know, I believed in hell. I believed in fire and brimstone. Of course they believed it. It's not the most realistic of fish. I'll give it that.
It's like a kid's playground.
But I'm sure it was very effective. I think it's wonderful. I'm going to go there and find it. I'm going to see it. It's going to go on the list of places that you and I have to visit, Bendor.
Okay.
Come on, a giant fish
Yeah.
pulpit. It's
So-
got to be worth number 3.
All right, I agree. But final question: is it somewhere very far away from the sea in Poland where people would not have known what anything fishy looked like?
Yes, it is. It's near the Czech border, so right down in southern Silesia. So it's a long way away from the sea. It's near the mountains. So
Okay.
there would have not been much opportunity to draw informative parallels between real whales and
I
this
see.
pulpit. Yeah. Let's move on. Man can spend too long, even in a small Polish village. Number two. Now, there's a bit of a dispute here, but I'm going to go with you on this. We've decided that the number 2 should be Chardin's great painting called The Ray, which hangs in the Louvre. It's a wonderful thing. Tell us about that then, Bendor.
Okay, so this was Chardin's sort of debut painting, wasn't it? This got him into the the Académie Française as an artist, and it's a sort of rather conventional still life in some ways, with a stingray hung up on the wall and oysters and other dead fish lying around, a jug, and a knife and a fork. But enlivening the scene is a cat, which looks, I think, is frightened by one of the fish. And I think this reinforces why I was right to choose William Blake's picture of a cat and a fish, because no matter how exciting looking or tasty looking the fish is, to make a fish painting come alive, it always needs a cat.
Bendor,
You pay me for this kind of wisdom, Waldy.
you call me you call yourself an art historian, do you? Is that right?
No, well, my art history knowledge is, as you may have guessed, quite selective.
Dearie me. Look, this great Chardin is completely unlike any other still life that had come before it. It does indeed feature a ray, or skate, as I think we call them in England, hanging in the middle. But quite deliberately, this strange fish, if you've seen a ray, you know they're weird looking, is stretched out on a hook and hanging there in the manner of Jesus Christ on the cross. Now, it's a well-known fact about this picture that it refers to Rembrandt's famous still life of the carcass of an ox, you know, the one of the ox hanging there, which also is a kind of stand-in for Jesus. And the first time this picture was actually shown was at the Feast of Corpus Christi in Paris in June of 1728. The Corpus Christi is the feast of the body of Jesus Christ. It's the whole thing that happens in the Eucharist, where the bread and the wine turns into Jesus, or supposedly turns into Jesus. So it's loaded with heavy religious meaning. It's a ghastly thing, this fish. I mean, it's sort of bloody, gory, it's been wounded. And all around it are almost looking like implements of torture, the saucepan in which it's going to be boiled, knife in which it's been cut up. And the cat, you know, is clearly a malicious presence in this still life. I mean, it's strolling across the oysters. We all know what oysters mean in art. They've always meant the same things in still lives. They always will. And it's it's toying with them. So it's an implication of the original sin. Of course it is. What else could it be? Implication of the original sin and Jesus having to die on the cross to save us. So this is a crucifixion, which doesn't look like a crucifixion, but which is loaded with all the meaning that you had in our Polish pulpit, really, of salvation. Why? Because we are full of original sin. And it's all done in this beautiful, dark, scary, throbby still life with a fish.
And why has the ray got this sort of rather vacant grin on it, though?
That's what rays do. You know, have you ever heard of a Jenny Hanover?
No.
Okay, we'll put up a picture of a Jenny Hanover on the zcz.com website. Jenny Hanovers were supposedly the origins of the mermaid. And they were the skeletons of rays and skates, which malicious fishermen used to toy with and reshape a bit, because the skeleton of a ray looks like a human being. What is actually the mouth and the nostrils look like a human face. So the reason why this thing looks so spooky is that it looks like there's a human face on the fish, and that it's got outstretched arms. And all that's to do with the intricate sort of skeletal form of a ray. So people used to make these horrible little mannequin things out of the skeletons of rays, which looked like little demons and stuff, and things to frighten kids with them. So there's a whole existence of them. I'll tell you, you must know this. There's a very famous Jenny Hanover in a painting by Hogarth, Calais Gate. If you look at Calais Gate, there's a bunch of nuns in the corner.
Yeah.
What are they doing? Can you remember Calais Gate? They're praying around a skate, one of these, a Jenny Hanover.
Oh, I see.
So Hogarth is mocking the religiosity of the French Catholicism. So there's a whole history of the skates, you know, being used that way. It looks like a face, but it's not actually a face. It's the mouth and the nose. It's ambiguity.
Perhaps you're right. I feel like I might throw back a phrase you often quote to me, which is the Dinart, you see what you want to see. And don't forget that this painting has a pair, which is called the buffet, and which is a table laden with sort of more food, mainly fruit, with a dog jumping up at it. So that one doesn't seem to have quite so much religious meaning, unless you're going to tell me otherwise, and I'm not sure we've got the time for it.
We haven't got the time, but of course it's got religious meaning. Or the fruit. What did Eve pick in the Garden of Eden? Fruit from the tree of knowledge. You know, fruit, it's all about this sin, the original sin. Everything in religious art's about the original sin. You know, that's why the oysters are there. But let's leave that for another time. Let's do the oyster in art on some future occasion, Bender, because we are running out of time. We do need to move on. And we are moving on very quickly to a picture that isn't so much a picture of fish as a kind of fish orgy. I mean, you could not ask for more fish than there are in this picture by Franz Schneider's. It's an extraordinary thing, Bendor.
It's a huge tableau of every fish available in Flanders, I think, in the early 17th century. It belongs to the Hermitage in St. Petersburg. It was painted in about 1618. And we've got everything here, haven't we? We've even got seals and salmon and horseshoe crabs and trouts and catfish, lobsters, everything you could possibly wish to see. It's all here in extraordinary detail. And I always think that Snyder's is a rather underrated artist, because the technique that we see here is just fantastic. Everything is glistening. Everything is identifiable. I mean, imagine the smell he had to put up with while he was painting all these dead fish. But Snyder's, you know, he worked very closely. He was part of the gang with Rubens, Van Dyck and Jordaens. But nowadays, I think because he was just a sort of seen as an animal painter, he's slightly forgotten, and we only really celebrate the trio of Jordaens, Van Dyck and Rubens. And I think that's a little bit unfair. And when I look at paintings like this, I think that his reputation should be higher. Do you agree with that?
I do. I think it's a terrific picture. I mean, I'd have the Chardin on top, but this is an amazing image. I mean, the skill he displays here in capturing all these different textures of the different types of fish, and as you say, all these other animals that the people seem to eat in the 17th century, the otters and seals and all that stuff. I mean, it's a disgusting image, isn't it? I mean, if you showed that to a vegetarian, you know, they'd throw up, wouldn't they? I mean, it's terrifying. Actually, it's a terrifying picture.
Yeah, but it's packed full of all sorts of meanings and history, and this is where I'm going to hopefully slightly redeem myself by telling you a little bit more about it. And now it's not really obviously religious, but we have to recognize that these scenes emerged from a tradition in Flanders of still life tableaus like this, which had at their heart a religious story, often in the background. And of course, although we don't see in the background here any obviously religious figures, it's all viewers would have recognized that it's a sort of reference to people like St. Peter, who of course was a fisherman, and the very obvious fact that fish out of water cannot live, just as a Christian who is not baptized is not saved. So that would have been immediately obvious to people, and that's why I think Snyder's doesn't put anything very obviously religious in the picture. But of course, we're dealing with Flanders and the Low Countries in the early 17th century here, and that was a time of great commercial prosperity, particularly fishing, which was a huge part of the industry. And what fish in the painting do you think, Waldy, is the one we're supposed to be looking at most? What's the most celebrated fish here?
Well, it's got to be that huge one at the front, isn't it? I don't know what it is. The one sitting underneath the seal next to the turtle. That one, no?
Well, I'm going to direct you towards the rather shimmering, golden-looking basket on the table, which is full of herring. And herring was a mainstay of the economy in that part of the world. And if you look in the background of the picture, you see a particular boat which is called a herringbus. That was a boat that was specifically designed for catching herring, and they were like little mini herring factories. And if you look in front of the herring booth, can you see all the little barrels on the dockside there?
Yeah, barrels, yes.
In the herring booths, they were designed to go to sea for an awfully long time, and they were factories. And you would catch the herring, salt them, and pack them in the ship, and they were immediately ready to be offloaded in barrels when the ship came in. And often, because herring was such a prized and valuable commodity in the North Sea, the herring fleets were accompanied by the navies of respective nations. And so topicality, we always like to slip in a bit of topicality, because at this very moment, Britain and Europe are arguing about fish. And Snyder's was there documenting it 400 years ago.
There have always been fish wars. And of course, let's not forget that, hate to go on about religion, but Christ was represented by the fish in the catacombs. In the first ever symbol of Jesus was the fish. So these things are always loaded. And Soutine painting that you didn't like so much, that's a herring as well. So, we come a full circle. I think what we've certainly done is proved the significance, the importance, the magnitude of the fish in art, and that's a big success, I think.
Good. And just very quickly before we go, bottom right in the Snyders, you can see, of course, a cat, which proves my point that all good fish pictures need to have a cat in them.
Well, we'll do cats some other time, okay? But on a scale of 1 to 5, I'll give it 5. But let's move on. That's quite enough fish for now, I think. Time to go to something a little bit lighter in its pleasures. That part of the program where you and I get to imagine, where we can have anything, absolutely anything we choose on our wall.
On the wall.
Fun time, yes, it's on the wall where we get to fill our imaginary museum with great things. Now, Bendor, it's been a bit of a dark podcast so far. We've had forgeries, we've had deadly religious fish. How are you going to lighten us up with something pleasing now?
Well, because you so eloquently persuaded me of the merits of having fakes around to keep us honest in our art appreciation, actually this week I've chosen a fake, Waldy. I'm going for the great Han van Meegeren, who, as many people will know, was the prolific forger of Vermeer in Holland in the 1930s and 1940s. And his greatest success, if you like, was to trick Hermann Goering into buying one of his fake Vermeers for a huge price. And Goering, fat Nazi toad that he was, thought that this painting, Christ with the Adulteress, which he bought in 1942, was one of his masterpieces, and he put it on display for all his Nazi colleagues to marvel at. And after the war, when the Dutch authorities discovered that Van Meegeren had sold this Vermeer, they charged him with treason because he'd sold a masterpiece of Dutch national art. And of course, the penalty for treason was death. So the only way he could avoid having his head chopped off was to fess up and say, excuse me, I painted it. And at first, because the art world in the Netherlands had believed all these Vermeers he'd been churning out for about 10 years, they refused to believe him. and said, no, he's just lying. So they had this famous trial in which Van Meegeren had to paint in a courtroom another fake Vermeer to prove that he painted all these ones. And the work I've chosen for my on the wall is his first most successful Vermeer fake, which was the Supper at Emmaus, painted in 1937. It ended up on display in the Museum Boijmans in the Netherlands. It was hailed in the Burlington magazine as, quote, every inch of Vermeer. And the really clever thing that Vermeer did is actually, nowadays we can recognize it as a terrible painting. But what he cleverly did was he spotted the gap in the market, because when we think of Vermeer today, we think of small jewel paintings of Dutch interiors and magical light. But there is one early work which is enormous in the National Gallery of Scotland, Christ in the House of Martha and Mary. And all the experts had assumed that there must be more Vermeers like this out there, and Van Meegeren cottoned onto that, and he supplied that demand. Very clever, really. So I'm going to have this on my wall as my sort of memento mori, to remind me that we have to be really careful what we look at. And I flatter myself that occasionally I discover the odd painting, and this will warn me to go cautiously and always double check everything.
Mm. Don't you think? I mean, looking at it now, don't you think it's a really bad forgery? I mean, I find myself baffled by the Van Meegeren story. I can't see why so many people fell for it. I mean, the forgeries that you had earlier on that you showed me, they were terrific. You can see anybody falling for that. But this supposed Vermeer, it's so clunky. It's very un-Vermeer-like. And I have to say that I know the painting in Edinburgh, the Christ and the House of Martha and Mary. I mean, that doesn't look very Vermeer-like to me either. I'm sure it's right, but it's not what you think of when you think of Vermeer. So I'm just surprised that Van Meegeren got away with it for as long as he did. I just think there are much better forgers out there than he ever was, even though he must be the most famous of all of them, isn't he? So how did he get away with it? But I love the story of the Goering, selling stuff to Goering. That's really good. But I can also see him. You see, we talked about how devious forgers are. I can also see him when he's having his trial back in after the war's finished. I can just see him talking himself out of the death penalty by admitting to the fact that he did it. I mean, it's a very sort of forger's thing to do, isn't it? It's cunning. It's a sort of cunning way to get out of it, isn't it? Did he actually end up in jail or not?
He was going to serve 1 year in jail for sort of fraud, but he died of a heart attack just before he could serve his sentence, unfortunately, in 1947. But you do raise a very important point, Waldy, actually. And I'm going to claim here that in an episode of Fake or Fortune, I did actually help discover another one of Van Meegeren's forgeries. This was a painting at the Cordon Institute, which was in his collection, but which he had always claimed, even to his dying day, was actually a genuine work. It was a Dirk van Berburen of the Procurus. And this painting ended up in the Courtauld. And for a long time, the authorities at the Courtauld couldn't decide if it was fake or not. And in the program, we helped prove that it was, because we discovered that it had been made with bakelite, which was the ingredient that Van Meegeren used to harden the paint. But this may sound rather arrogant, but I knew, and Philip knew, Philip Mould knew, just by looking at the painting initially, that it was very, very likely to be Van Meegeren, because it was so like his style, and frankly, it was terrible. But the point you raise is an interesting one, because I think all forgers assume something of their time, and that goes into their paintings. So Van Meegeren's all look a bit like illustrations from sort of news magazines in the 1940s and 30s. And I think because the audience at that time was conditioned into thinking that's what figurative art should look like, it helped them to be tricked. And although you say now that the paintings that we mentioned, the Franz House, for example, look really obviously like they could be real, I wonder if in 10 or 20 years' time, we might look back and think, God, that looks obviously fake. Look at his haircut. He looks just like Harry Styles. And I think it's very difficult when you're in the time to actually step out of what you think is visually correct and make a judgment at that moment.
Mm. I'd like to think that these would not have fooled me because they just don't look right. But I know what you mean. I mean, it's like if Sean Greenhouse did paint La Bella Principessa, and that's, of course, totally under discussion. But if she really was Sally from the Co-op, she would have had that kind of hairstyle, and she would have looked like a sort of 1970s girl from the checkout, which there is about this picture. There is a bit of La Bella Principessa. It is as if the times are in her and she can't get rid of them. So that's perhaps what all experts like yourself have to look out for. You know, it's not so much the hand of the forger as the whisper of the era that produced them.
Yeah. It's like a costume drama. I mean, when we see the costume, but the latest adaptation of Jane Austen or whatever, we see it on the BBC today, and we think, oh, that's really good. But when you look back at the ones they made in the 70s and 80s, you think, bloody hell, look at all those terrible hairstyles. It's always the hairstyle that gives it away, isn't it?
Yeah, there's always that little thing that goes wrong. Well, this is what forgers play on and prey on, isn't it? It is exactly those kinds of little doubts. I mean, that's yet another reason why I think, despite, the mailbag I'm going to get because of this, I think they're quite a good thing. I mean, they keep us on our toes. And there's never been a time when we didn't need to be on our toes quite as keenly as we do at the moment. Let's get up on our toes and support the occasional good role of the forger, Bendor.
Yeah.
Well, I've moved on to something a bit better, I think, and that is the wonderful Sophonisba Anguissola, who's this Renaissance artist who has recently become more prominent. Feminist art history has rescued her, and she painted this wonderful picture of a game of chess. Now, chess is very much in the air at the moment, Bendor. I'm sure, like everybody else in the entire modern world, you've been watching The Queen's Gambit on Netflix, haven't you?
We tried 2 episodes. We couldn't really get into it. Didn't
Oh,
like it so much. Did you like it?
oh, I thought it was great. I really liked it a lot. It was just interestingly made, but the best thing about it was that it was about chess. It wasn't about cooking, it wasn't about baking cakes, and it wasn't about serial killers. It was about chess. The novelty value alone upped it in my estimation. But it brought chess into mind. I mean, I'm a terrible chess player, but I quite like it, and I like the way that chess has been used over and over and over again in art as a sort of symbol or a metaphor for war or conflict. But you don't get that here in this Sophonisba. This is like a beautiful game of chess because it's her 3 sisters. She came from a family she had 3 sisters and 5 kids, and one of them's playing chess against the younger one, and the very youngest is looking on and smiling, and the middle one has just made a move. It's a sort of family picture about chess as an entertainment with this beautiful sense of kinship about it. But looking on, in the right-hand corner is an older figure. This is the nanny or the maid. And she, of course, like all these older women in these kinds of pictures, represents the future, doesn't she? I mean, this is what they're all going to turn into. They're all going to grow old. Enjoy your game of chess while you can, because this is what awaits you. So there is this little ripple of symbolism about it. But basically, it's lovely because it shows chess to be something that the family's always done together. So it's like the Monopoly of the Renaissance. At Christmas time, instead of playing Monopoly, you got round a table and played chess. And what a superb game that is, to have existed all this time, to have been so important for so long. I love it.
It's a lovely painting. And we should have a game of chess one day. I think you've whooped my ass because I'm too impatient to be any good at chess.
No, lousy. I am lousy. I wish to be much better than I am.
Okay.
I can't think more than 2 moves ahead.
Well, I can only think 1 move ahead, as you could probably tell from this podcast. But Sophon is another rock star artist in her day, like Artemisia Gentileschi, and slightly ignored, more than slightly ignored over history.
And before Artemisia, earlier than Artemisia, a generation earlier. So she was a pioneer.
Yeah. But I don't know if you've ever seen Van Dyck's portrait drawing of her in his Italian sketchbook. Have you seen that?
No, tell me.
When he's in Sicily, he looks Sophonisba out. In his notebooks, it's the only interview with an artist that he ever records. And he does this beautiful little portrait drawing of her when she's, I think, about 93. And she's almost blind. And he describes how she has to hold pictures up to her nose to look at them. And he notes down all the wisdom that she gave him. And I think that's absolutely fantastic. Indication of how important she was, that an artist like Van Dyck, who elsewhere in his notebooks only really pays attention to Titian, went out of his way to pay attention to what Sophonisba Anguissola had to say about painting.
Oh, how wonderful. I'm going to look that up straight away. That's a beautiful story, Bender. I thank you for that. That's going to get me looking at Van Dyck again. I hope everybody enjoys looking at Sophonisba too. We've talked and talked and talked and talked. We've lined up a game of chess for the future, but I do think that's probably quite enough from me and you, Bender. Or certainly from me, from this podcast. It's goodbye.
And it's cheerio from me.
Waldy and Bendy.